So can we do the sign-in thing? You're welcome.
Sign in?
Yes.
Is it going around? Yeah.
Yeah, please sign in. We just really need your name. I don't really need anything else, especially for who's here. But I do have to have some proof that people were here.
Okay, great. So it looks like we can get started. So I'm Melanie Conroy in the Department of World Languages and Literatures. And so this is our workshop on maps and mapping. And Catherine Phipps from History is going to present a lot of the, I believe, more sophisticated stuff. So I wanted to just quickly walk through, if you're kind of starting from zero, how can you get started? So the data set that I've been working with a lot is letters data set. So it's a data set of Enlightenment era, so 18th century letters. And the letters have birthplaces, and then, the letters have places associated with them for the sender, and then also the correspondents have birthplaces and death places. So what I end up with is a lot of, repeated places. Sometimes you have places that are very unspecific, so, America or Belgium. But you also have, very specific places, so, small towns in France, cities in France, that just recur throughout the data set. So I think a lot of us end up starting out with data that kind of looks like this, right? Like from humanities data sets, we often don't have exact addresses. We might have even stuff like the Orient, right? Like where is the Orient? So there's always these questions of, where precisely on a modern map we're going to place things. And I don't think there's one answer for that. Generally, people will use something called a gazetteer in order to connect place names to contemporary places. But another way to do it is just for you to look yourself at your data set and think about, for example, where do you think America is? Or where do you think at sea is? That's another one that occurs in my data set. And then to sort of place those places yourself. One of the reasons that I think that people are so excited about mapping these days is it's just a lot easier. There's a lot of freely available tools that work really well and can do things automatically. So one of those things is called a Geo Coder. So if I start with my list of places that I had from the letters, Switzerland, etc., I can remove the duplicates. So, if I'm on Excel, there's a remove duplicate function. I'm in Google Docs, and I can just download an add-on to find the duplicates. So you just click Find Duplicates, and you can export them. So that gives me a shorter list of places to geocode. And geocoding is just using software to find the modern latitude and longitude coordinates, and those are really across all different kinds of visualization or any kind of geographic analysis software. You're going to need latitude and longitude coordinates for most of them. In this case, so I've got my places where I've removed the duplicates. So all of these occur only once. And then I have columns which have to, in this case, be called latitude and longitude, because otherwise it won't fill up the columns. And then I've created another column that I call lat long, where I just use this concatenate function to put the latitude and the longitude with a comma in between, because that's what's required. So I've downloaded from the Google Docs website the geocode by awesome table function. So all I should have to do, and let's hope this works, is click Start Geocoding, and hopefully this is going to work. There we go. So it's just looking them up, and it's telling me what it thinks America is, what it thinks Ireland is. A lot of these are set points. There's an agreed upon international definition of what Italy is, what Ireland is. So what this is doing is looking through the Google Maps, Google Earth software, and pulling out these coordinates. In general, they work extremely well. If you have, for example, a place that's Paris, it does tend to prefer American locations, so it's more likely to go to Paris, Texas than Paris, France. So it's a computer, right? It's not a human. So most of us, if we say Paris, we're going to think Paris, France, right? But the computer is not that intelligent. So you really do have to make sure, after this process, you want to go through and make sure that these are the actual places that you were intending to find. So once you've geocoded a set of locations, and so in order to find those good locations, you really should have either an address and a city, or a city and a country, or a city and a zip code. If you just have one word, that's really where you're going to get yourself into trouble. I mean, we've all used GPS, and maybe you just type Memphis into your GPS, and it finds you a restaurant in Los Angeles, right? Like, you can't just type Jonesville and then just hope it finds the one that you're thinking of. So you really do want to put as much information as possible, even down to a modern address. It's not going to know historical addresses. So you've got your list of geocoded places. Stop that. So this is that same list, and it's just gone through and I've geocoded and I've verified that these are actually the places that I wanted to geocode. And then once you've geocoded, there's really a lot of options for visualization. There are expensive options, there are pretty options, all sorts of things. One of the easiest options, if you're teaching a class and you just want to get it done, there is an option within Awesome Table to just create a Google map, so you can use that. The problem with Google Maps is it's copyrighted, so you can't actually use it. You're not even supposed to be taking screenshots and using it in presentations. You can't use it in publications. So a lot of people put a ton of time into creating Google Maps visualizations, and then you discover that you're not allowed to use it for the purpose that you wanted to. So one of the options that I use a fair amount that's pretty easy to get into is called Palladio, and that's a visualization package that's specifically designed for historians and humanists. So it's relatively easy to use, and its basic default settings tend to be things that are interesting to humanists, and it's just very easy to create the sorts of maps we would be interested in. You can't create as much, you can't modify the diagrams as much as you would be able to if you went with some more sophisticated mapping software. So it's at hdlab at hdlab.stanford.edu, so that's the Humanities plus Design Lab, and then called Palladio. So if you go to the first screen, it's very mysterious, right? It just says create a new project. So that's one of the hardest things about Palladio is there's not a ton of information about how to use it. I'm actually working on a user guide, and I posted on my academia.edu visualizing the French Enlightenment network, and that has all kinds of examples and more information if you're interested. So you would take copy your data, and then actually with Palladio you can just paste it. So it's all completely automatic, and click load and hope it loads. And then Palladio will try to identify what kind of data you're loading. So if you're loading numbers, it's going to try to guess, well, these are numbers. If you're loading text, so places, that was the place names. It guessed it was text, so that works. Latitude, longitude, numbers. And then lat long, it guessed that it's coordinates. So if I click on the map feature, there are multiple different kinds of tiles or maps. So, you might want sort of a featureless map. You might be working on something that's more geographical, so you might want a terrain map where you can actually see, mountains and that sort of thing. You can add the street maps, and in that case, even when you zoom in, there's quite detailed information. It has city names. If you go closer, it has buildings, it has streets. So usually you're probably going to use one of the bigger maps, or you're going to use the streets map, which again, it is modern streets, right? So if you're working on 12th century data or something, it's probably better to just go with the plain one. So I'm going to delete the streets map, and we'll just go back to the plain one. So we add new layer, and that's where we add our data. So add new layer, data. You have two main choices with Palladio. So you can have the points map, which just has individual points, or you can have point to point. So point to point, you have to have two coordinates. So if you have a lot of start places, but then you don't have a lot of the end places, it's only going to show the ones where you have two. So that's sort of a limitation. You can choose your color, and then you can choose to size points. So those are the places that are mentioned in my data set, and then you can see the number of times that they're mentioned by the size of the circle. So that's a sort of really basic, simple map that you can build pretty quickly. You can get into Google Maps if you have Google Maps. You can get into Google Docs. You can have a list, geocode it, paste it, and in under an hour you can have a map. With this sort of technology, you can add other layers, right? So I can have my let's say if these were the birthplaces, I can have those in red. I can have a separate one of death places. I can put those in blue. So I can keep, importing data and putting it on the map, but it's a little bit more laborious. It's really, built for this kind of, one layer of data. So if I look at, these are just the places. If I look at the full data set, I have more information. So one of the cool things about Palladio is that you can really easily filter the data. So you might have, just a bunch of places, and some of them are associated with letters, and some of them are associated with books, and some of them are associated with painters. And if you just look at red dots, how much is that telling you? So you can actually, in this case, it's looking at the knowledge networks of the people, so the interests of the people who are associated with these places. So I have the letters literary selected, but we can look at the sciences and say, okay, so what are the birthplaces of scientists, people involved in political economy, philosophy, and so you can really easily just add and delete people. That is something that you often can't do on a lot of the more sophisticated software that's intended for scientists, because they have very large data sets, and they're not as interested in looking at, oh, let's add 3 people, let's take 3 people off. So I found this feature is really, really helpful, because you can say, oh, look, you can say, let's add, the antiquarian. We'll look at the antiquarians. Okay, they're, very much in this region. If we look at political economists, and the numbers for these are sometimes things like 3 or 7. So, it's not very helpful if you're thinking about humanity in general, but if you're thinking about like my data set, my people, I want to actually identify which person is associated with this particular place. It's a really, good way to move from the full data set to pieces that are more meaningful. So that's what I wanted to show you guys. Does anyone have any questions? It was a lot of information.
Can I ask a dumb question? So you had that included in your original data? That was part of that spreadsheet? How did you get the scientists, the antiquarian, you know what I mean? Like, how did you get that in?
Yes,
that was
exactly.
one of the columns that was copied. Okay.
Basically,
I just didn't
you would have your places, and then you can associate places with other data. And so in this case, I have, their gender, the social network, professional network, and obviously I have to gather all that data, right? There's a big difference between saying I'm going to look at the publication places of 10 books versus, looking at the content of the books, looking at who wrote the books. So as soon as you start looking at more than one aspect of the data, it becomes much more complicated. Just doing a simple map can be very quick, but as soon as you actually want to know, more about the background data, it becomes much more difficult.
Does this software only map like frequency at points, or will it map a trajectory? Like, is it?
Yeah, so it does. That's exactly. So it does a trajectory. Let me go back. Yeah, it does a time span if I wanted it. It does. There's something to point. Death. Yeah, so this is a little bit misleading because I think there's 2,000 people in here, and these are just their birth and death places. So it's not all the places they went, right? And so I actually, with this software, wouldn't even be able to map that. But it's birth and death places for the subset of people who have both a birth and a death place that are known. So I think it's about 600 people. So this kind of stuff is really useful, again, for stuff like letters, but anytime that you have, some kind of transmission, because it is only 2 points, it's not 6 points, it's not 10 points. Okay, great, yeah. So basically, I think there are a lot of tools out there, and most of them are pretty user-friendly. So if you're sort of playing around with it, Awesome Table is something I found like 3 months ago, basically because a lot of those Geo Coders, they'll create a new one and it's interfacing with Google Maps, and then sometimes the person who is maintaining it just stops maintaining it or whatever, and a new one pops up. So it's more like two categories. The software that helps you to get the coordinates, and the software that helps you visualize it. But there's I would say hundreds of both, and you can go anywhere from completely free like this to thousands of dollars. So that's a quick overview. So I think Catherine, you're going to talk more about sort of use cases and.
Yeah, I'll talk about, I'm kind of going to step back and do like a bigger view of what we're thinking about. So are you ready for me to switch this over?
Yeah.
Okay, so I thought it would be worthwhile to spend just a few minutes thinking through what we're talking about when we're talking about even something like digital humanities or digital mapping, because I think it means different things to different people. And these are some of the specific mapping tools that I'm going to give you examples from. And they are accessible in different ways. None of them are super easy, but some are easier than others. So if I just start with the idea of digital humanities or digital mapping is sort of a subset of digital humanities, and it started around 1950 with the idea of humanities computing. So just putting those two things together is an old idea. But the idea of actually digital humanities wasn't coined until 2001, right? So this is still a very new thing. And for those of us that have been out of graduate school for more than 10 years, It's something that, you know, at least I'm struggling to keep up with, at least to some degree. It's really been just in the last 10 years that this is becoming a significant form of academic inquiry. And I think that there's a lot of excitement about it. There's a lot of sense that this is something that is going to make everything different somehow, right? So if we look just at the first issue of Digital Humanities Quarterly, part of their mission statement was that they said it is tempting in this first issue to pose the question, what is digital humanities? And perhaps to attempt an answer. Instead, we defer this question to the future with the expectation that it will be answered or at least addressed in the annals that are to be written and published here. Not the first issue, nor even the 10th. We will give a sense of the emerging shape. So more than 12 years later, I think that shape is still emerging, right? And exactly what it is still somewhat difficult to define, but I think it still encompasses that same sense of optimism that somehow this is, we're in the midst of becoming something different. Partly with the idea that maybe new types of technology are going to give us new insights into what we study, right? So this sense of possibility and the sense of newness is still something that that we are thinking about, and it's certainly still something that I think the idea that it's still a possibility, but not necessarily something that is essential or you know, going to stay in the same place that it is now may be part of why it is hard to get funding, right? I mean, there is some funding out there, but it's very competitive. So this idea that we are going to use this technology to come up with some kind of new practices, new methodologies, have maybe new ways of knowing or new access to knowledge is still this promise that's still out there, and new sites that get launched and new tools that are coming out still have this sort of sense of becoming, right? That we're going to figure out what's new by looking at old material in new ways or putting them in new spaces together. And so, so I kind of am still thinking through this. Is it really working? How much is it changing how we know things, especially about history? It's letting us put together all kinds of data that we never would have been able to put together before, but are we actually seeing something different other than that it's like compressed somehow, right? That we're gaining access to a lot more information in a smaller place. So I thought thinking through that question with a couple of these different platforms would be worthwhile. So I don't know how many of you have used ArcGIS. It's a very complex software, and I have taken three out of the 4 classes on it through the geography department, and you need 4 just to get a basic certificate, like just to kind of launch. So it's very time consuming. It's very interesting. Part of it is you have to learn the software, which has a pretty steep learning curve, but then also you either have to find the data or generate the data that you want to use. And so honestly, I've kind of stalled out a little bit at this moment on it because taking the time to compile all that is a big demand, and I'm hoping that some of what I want to access, somebody else is going to partly be creating.
And a lot of times there aren't really good historical data sets. Like if you work on more contemporary stuff, there's great data sets already out there, but you know, for historical stuff, you have to build it yourself.
Right. I'm working in the 19th century, which isn't even that historical. I mean, it is historical for some people. For some people, that's very recent. But
the American Distille's Exchange New England. That's so way back there.
far back then. So anyway, but the idea behind ArcGIS is that you have a base map which even just finding your base map can be hard. So I work on Japan, so finding base maps on contemporary Japan isn't that hard, but then figuring out how to overlay the older maps on top of that is one of the challenges, because I actually want to start with the older map, but have it, you know, geo-rectified so that you can find the right locations on that older map. So that's just one step. And then with ArcGIS, you're building layers, right? So whether you want to look at counties or transportation systems or housing or businesses or whatever, you have to build all of those different layers, and then you can take them on or off and see different relationships among the different layers. But it's very much a layer-based software. And again, it lets you put a lot of information in the same place in ways that you never could before, which may allow you to see new patterns, to analyze new patterns. And I just pulled up this one on Atlanta transit systems on the frequency. So this is a map of Atlanta. So if you zoom out, you can see how this is the area that it's focused on, and the lighter areas have heavier numbers of transit trips per hour. So they're using the transit system data that is allowing them to show this. And it's not clear just from this what transit exactly means, if they're looking just at sort of, you know, subway train type riders as opposed to anything on the highway. But if you look more specifically at some of these parcels of land, and they're using more than 167,000 of them, you can click on certain ones, and it will give you more highlighted information. Within a 0.25 mile walking distance of this parcel, there are 5 transit stops available and 56 trips made per hour. So I guess that's the number of people on that number of transit stops. So this is just a way to try to generate a sense of the amount of traffic going in and out of Atlanta at a specific time. And this is just 7 to 9 a.m. on a typical weekday. So, you know, something like this takes quite a long time to compile the information. It looks like maybe the person that put this one together was able to draw on sources that the transit authority is collecting anyway, and that they were probably able to find a base map of Atlanta that allowed them to put this together. But this is just one example of a map that uses ArcGIS. Then there are things that use similar kinds of data, and this is sort of the more moneyed version, and things that have the bells and whistles that most of us don't have access to. But I just wanted to show you by comparison one that is less static and is able to show you London the London transit system as a heartbeat. I'm not sure why that's only partial, but there we go. And it gives you more of a sense of who's coming in London at what time, who's going out of London at what time, which traffic stops are busier, which traffic stops are less busy. So the idea is that the public could use this and say, oh, it's going to be really busy then, I think I'll wait to go at a different time when my particular subway station won't have so many commuters on it, right? So there are some of these kinds of things which might have a more practical application, but are able to take some of the same kinds of data that you're using in ArcGIS, but animate it in a different way. And I don't think that ArcGIS is animating quite in that same way, but when you build the different layers, you can have access to more different kinds of patterns that you can compare and contrast over time. And because my data is still so incomplete, I don't have my own to show you, so I thought I would just pull up a couple that are that are out there. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time just kind of looking around on their website, because that's something you can do on your own. But you usually can click on different layers, add layers or subtract layers to get a better sense of which pieces you want to see at the same time. A fun newer thing that the Esri website, which are the makers of ArcGIS, are doing, are something called story maps, which are a lot easier to make. You don't have to build your own data quite the same way, and you can use pre-formed maps. And this is one that I think would be fun to use in the classroom. I'm actually next year going to hopefully test out having students make their own story maps. So if anybody wanted to think through that with me, that would be,
That's
would be fun.
become really big in K through 12 second language
Oh, okay.
pedagogy. I see sessions at conference all the time.
Oh, really?
Story mapping.
Oh, really? Okay.
I don't know anything about it beyond that, but it's a big thing now.
Okay, so it's something where, so here's an example of it. So this one is called Rivers of Plastic, the top 5 plastic polluting rivers of the world. And basically, somebody has put down the original map, added images, added sound, added just conventional maps, added different pieces to it, and then write a narrative for it so that it's almost like reading, a magazine story or something along those lines. So this one, you have basic information about how much plastic polluting is taking place in rivers, and they're likening it to the number of or size of elephants. And they talk about the Yangtze River, show you that on a map, talk about more statistics, take another look at China's river systems and what that means for how the pollution flows, and then how much ends up in the East China Sea. Then they do the same kind of an idea in India. Again, you can scroll through, and so they're kind of using the same basic pattern over the course of the 5 main rivers that they are looking at. And as you can see, 3 out of the 5 that they show are in China, and then this one is actually one in India and one in Africa. And then they go back to the why elephants, and end with this sort of putting them all together on one map about what the overall story is that you're saying here. This one is built on templates, and so there are different kinds of templates that you can pick. So there's this one, which is a story map tour, where you put mostly photos and videos and then link them to specific sites on a map, and then maybe tell your story. With this one, which you can have a side panel that gives text to add to your photos and videos. There's one that's called a story map series, where you can change locations or change themes, perhaps, on tabs at the top. You've got ones where you have, the swipe where it changes over time to compare how a map has changed over time, or perhaps to compare to different types of data. So there's different types. A cascade is what we just looked at, I believe. So there's different basic maps that you start with, and then you go in and upload your own things and fill that in. So it wouldn't be that difficult, I don't think, for students who have at least some sense of where to get, if you gave them some sense of where to get some of the proper maps and documents that they might put in. You could put in boxes with text or other things. So this is sort of an easy, basic place to start with working on digital mapping that doesn't have such a steep learning curve.
And Catherine, is the product in Story Maps, is it a web-based?
Yes. Yes. you can keep it private while you're working on it, and then you can make it public on their site. So yeah, it's a free way for students to, I think they just need to set up an account, and it's all free for them to work. Okay, and then this is another one of those bells and whistles one. This is through an NYU digital research, I think it's Digital Research Institute, where they have taken the same kinds of information and done it up really, I think, in a very interesting and exciting way. This is called the Green Street Project, or a long history of a short block. So they took one block in Manhattan and looked at how it changed over the course of 400 years. And again, this is one of these ones where it's kind of inspiring. It gives you some interesting this shows you some of the same kind of features, but more animated. So this one has the slide, you know, what it looks like today, and then what it looked like, I don't know, 19th century, something like that.
That's super cool.
And then you can pick, so what did the land look like originally before it was turned into a set of buildings, basically. So different types of maps and images to kind of give you a sense of what it looked like before settlement. And then it takes you to the colonial era and shows you, again, through this little scroll, you know, what it was like, and then they throw in some different information at different points. They put in maps or other documents and give you a sense of what this looked like in the colonial era. And then through residential period, brothels, when the garment industry was there. This is also layering, right? It's a different kind of layering than what you're doing on ArcGIS, and this one is full of images and documents and other things in a way that it's a multimedia presentation in a way that ArcGIS is not, but it's still based on that same sort of concept of layering and laying historical data on top of the original land and seeing how it shifts and changes over time. But each one of these different sections, each one of these historical moments that they have at the top are isolated from each other, right? You have to imagine the connections across the period of time as you go into each one. And ultimately, what they've been able to say about this is that this is a high-end, expensive block to live on or to have a business on, but it has been through all of these different changes, including when it was not a very, nice part of the city. And so, and seeing that some of the buildings have remained the same over time, or thinking about the kinds of different types of lives that have been lived on this block over 400 years is really interesting. This leads me to that question, though, of does it tell us anything new? No, it lets us compile all this and put it together in pictures and stories in a way that gives us new access to it, but I don't know that it changes any of the fundamental kinds of questions or the kind of knowledge that we get, that's different from how we normally do history. So I thought next I would look at a site that is also layered in a different, slightly different way. This is actually has a textbook that goes along with it called Hypercities, and then this is its own platform. I don't know what platform they used for the other one, but this one is saying exploring history with Hypercities. History is made every day, but it hasn't been made quite like this before with a digital humanities platform called Hypercities. Users are now involving 3D reconstructions, multimedia, archival maps, social media feeds, and hypertext to create or explore historical narratives. Okay, so this is a foundational platform that people can use to build some of the kinds of things that we just saw on the other one, which looks pretty seamless because it's so well created. And that NYU site only has 2 modules up because I think that it's just so intensive to create that, both in terms of time and resources. But another piece of what a lot of these are doing is they're trying to bring together different types of sources and different kinds of collaboration so that we have more access and more open access to things that we didn't have before. So so the Hypercities, let me go back to my slide. The Hypercities platform is designed to be collaborative. They have universities, museums, libraries, other kinds of cultural institutions, nonprofits, and community advocacy groups that are all contributing to the content. There are different types of content, whether it's public, external, or private collections. Some of it is open access, some of it you have to actually join to be able to access it, but they're trying to have more voices and more people contributing to the project, but they are still keeping it somewhat segregated. And this is one of the issues going forward with some of these types of open access projects is that it's hard for scholars in traditional disciplines, which we all are, to get credit for doing this kind of work because you're not publishing a peer-reviewed journal article or a book in the same way, but you are contributing to something that is bigger, maybe more exciting, more innovative, but the Academy hasn't caught up yet with how exactly you're going to get any kind of credit for that. Some are doing this where you have different levels of access to it, and maybe some of that is being edited by a body that may not be like too peer reviewed, but at least is being vetted in some way. There's also I'm not going to show it to you, but a video introduction on this Hypercities site that gives you a sense of how they're putting it together. Scalar is another one of these sites that allow you to do some multimedia, and a couple of friends of mine have just launched this one. They had gotten funding, I think a lot of it was NEH funding to host 3 bodies and structures workshops over the course of like a year or 2, and I went to one, I want to say 3 years ago, so I mean that's how long it's taken them to get up and running, and they had, out of three workshops with about 10, maybe up to 10 or 12 presenters each, and only have I don't know, 6 or 8 modules right now that they've got up, partly because of the intense time that the 2 people that have put this together, that it's required for them to put it together, and then also questions about if people have enough outside materials that they can show on it in terms of copyright access. So you may have maps or images or other things that you found in the archives that you want to talk about, but you don't necessarily have permission to put it up on a public site like this. So there's a lot of sort of behind the scenes stumbling blocks that people are getting to, but what these 2 are trying to do is they are trying to rather than see things as layered, right, which all the ones that I've shown you so far have this kind of layered quality to them, they're trying to create different entry points into the material so that you make different types of connections. I'm still skeptical that they're producing sort of new knowledge out of this. To me, without really going through the whole site and reading all of the essays and sort of figuring out what each one is saying and then going back and doing the different entry points is what's the most exciting. But just going to different entry points at random is kind of confusing, right? So, or is very fragmented, let's say, way of looking at it. So they actually have this whole introduction about what they're doing, what they're hoping, and again, it's this. I mean, this just came out in January of this year that they're still hoping. It's still with that sense of possibility. Are we going to have new knowledges? And they're using all kinds of the space, place, spatialities literature, and using words like kenopolitic, and right, they're very much in all of that kind of language and trying to rethink space and place and what this stuff means. But I'm not really sure yet. It's cool and it's amazing to go through history in this way, but I'm not sure it's producing new knowledge. Maybe that's my own skepticism, but it's worth looking at. So they start with this original tag map, and they tag all of the different articles in different ways, whether or not they relate to flows, whether they relate to material culture, whether they relate to infrastructures, etc. And so each of the modules has these kinds of things. They have geotag map involved in it. They have complete grid visualization. And so they have all of these different aspects of it. Right now, these are all put up here by historians. They're hoping eventually that, and they have a place for comments where anybody can kind of write in and contribute to the story. They're also hoping that they can just have people who may have lived through some of these things that they have modules about could add their own material. So the one module that I was going to show you is this one on place annihilation. David Fedman has been, he's had some traditional publications on this, but it's basically about the US firebombing of Japan the last year of World War II, where something like 60% of Japan's urban infrastructure, I think it was 66 cities in total, were firebombed, and much of it was destroyed and incapacitated long before we actually dropped the atomic bombs on Japan. And so he starts with what looks like a kind of typical, maybe a little bit like the story maps type of story with images, and then has some different kinds of texts or documents that are thrown in. This one you can look at as a, I think you can look at it as a full screen. Anyway, I'm not going to figure that out right now. And then this one has a map which gives you, if you look at it close up, I feel like these public computers don't let you do the same kinds of things that your own laptops let you do in terms of, maybe they don't have the right players to let you get in on these maps. But you can zoom in on this and look, and this map actually lays out like a city size comparison, like Osaka is being compared to Chicago. Like those are roughly the same size cities, and so it tells you that 35% of Osaka was destroyed in these fire bombings. So if you think of 35% of Chicago being destroyed, then it gives you a kind of reference. And then he has, within this module, 5 or 6 different pages. It tells you what it's geotagged by, so if you go to these different geotags, it links up with all of the other modules geotagged. So you may be looking at a completely different story, but something that's also about Tokyo, for example, and compare or just put those two pieces of information next to each other. I think it's this one. That one actually takes you back to Utah, where they were doing some of the tests on these. This one, let's see if there's it's got the sound embedded in it.
We're getting all set to sail, to make all the monkeys wail, over the ocean ahoy. The sooner we start to do, the sooner the job is through, over the ocean ahoy. There'll be a little Tokyo in Tokyo.
Okay, so these bombs are being dropped on Tokyo and people are getting killed overnight in these vicious raids, and then people back home are writing songs like that about the effort. And so to have that sort of happy little tune, you know, against this story of destruction and these images of destruction, target maps, this one's of Yokohama, for example, you know, does put information together in ways that that can be jarring, that you can't necessarily, you know, you wouldn't be able to put that in a textbook, for example, or a journal article. So in that way, you're able to have sort of different levels of proximity of information near each other. But if you look at, just to show you, if you looked at this one of the maps of the cities that were destroyed and the bombardier view of them, and then looked at buildings, this takes you to all of the different places that buildings became a tag. And so, for example, it would take you to Mitsukoshi, which is a famous Japanese department store. It would take you over to that story, and maybe you'd think, oh, okay, well, here's another look at buildings. I don't actually have to go in and read the deep history of the fire bombings, but I can sort of skirt over these different stories and think about buildings across each of them. Again, with the idea that maybe there's going to be new thoughts that arise from that. This one takes you to a bunch of different cities that are tagged. So Daiden is one. This one really only comes back to Mitsukoshi right now, but you can imagine that if you get up hundreds of modules on here, then you know the rate of these tags is going to be, you know, kind of exponentially increased. And so maybe eventually you will start seeing new kinds of things that you have never seen before. But this is their whole idea here, is that you have these different entry points, right? That this is sort of like an underground network of information that you can sort of attack at different places and read in ways that you've never been able to read things before. And then I thought that I would show you something else that I found that I think kind of goes along with this idea. I don't know if any of you have seen this before, but it's a really interesting look at Wikipedia and information on Wikipedia. So this is all of the information for 400 years that correlates to Wikipedia articles. And you can go to, for example, inventions, say, and it pulls together all of the different kinds of inventions and the years that they were made. So if you click on the invention of the internet, you can go to the wiki page, you can watch a video about it, or you can go to related events, and it'll give you other kinds of inventions that were created. I don't know exactly how they correlate them, why those specific inventions came up. First, synthetic rubber. what's related to that. I'm not sure why that's related to, say, the typewriter, but anyway, even if this isn't sort of perfect, it gives you some, a different way to access the kind of information that's available on Wikipedia. If you looked at women's rights, for example, Cookie or Sarah could probably tell us more about this than the Wiki. Well, it's still going to be inventions. There you go. Different women. Women gained the right to vote in the UK in 1918, and then gives you other related types of episodes that you could look at. So apparently it was you could get divorced in France before you could vote in Britain. Kind of thing. So anyway, that's another kind of thing that people are doing with these, and while that is outside the scope of what I think individuals like us are capable of pulling together at this time, there's still all these cool things out there that could be used in classrooms that if people did want to do collaborative work, you could see where you could start pulling together different types of data sets that could produce some really interesting kinds of products. And I think especially as some of the platforms, like what Melanie was showing, are becoming more user-friendly and more accessible to people that don't have the time to kind of learn something as complex as ArcGIS, but just want to use it, that hopefully that will become something that we will increasingly be able to do. There's also an Alliance of Digital Humanities organizations, which is also, I think, trying to pull a lot of different groups together that want to help researchers, that want to bring in community, that want, we talk a lot about things like outreach and experiential learning, and it seems to me that some of these digital humanities organizations and platforms could be ways that we can actually do some of that, right? So that is another thing to kind of keep watching. And then I kind of just like this quote for that, which at its core, digital humanities is more akin to a common methodological outlook than an investment in any one specific set of texts or even technologies, that it's ultimately a social undertaking. And I think that sort of reinforces this idea that people are looking for open access, people are looking for collaboration, people are looking to have it to balance some of what scholars do with people who may have experienced things or have documents or have images that they can contribute, whether it's through museums or through libraries, or just because like Ancestry.com or something like that, they can like log in and be like, ooh, I've got a family picture from that moment, let me put it up, So again, back to that idea of like, the possibilities are endless, and it's all in transformation and moving forward, and we don't know what it means, but it's pretty cool. So that's all I was going to.
Does anyone have questions for Catherine? That was a lot of information. That's good.
I have a question. So I'm going to have to run in a second, but I did have a question of like whether is there a sub-industry springing up of like contractors you can hire to help do some of this stuff? I'm just sort of curious about, like now it's so easy, it's so cheap to get, transcripts done of your oral histories, right? Because you can outsource that, for $1 a minute.
I know that, for example, you can talk to people who teach like ArcGIS, and they will say like, if you have something that you want my students to work on, I could have like, you can give it to me and I will have my students answer it for a question on an exam.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So there's sort of
that kind of thing. I'm not saying like,
and I know that people who know that software really well, are willing to, some of them anyway, are willing to hire out their services.
Yeah.
But I don't know of any sort of organization where you could just be like, I need you to do this.
right? Because like I hired someone to make maps for my book, which he probably actually used some of this, but like
Oh yeah, well for books, but I don't know about.
But this, I realize this is different. Like, and he's a professor. Yeah, like you know what I mean. Like he's got better things to do most of the time. He just happened
I think that's the
time,
case
right?
though, right? If it's a discrete amount of work that you can sort of quantify and be like,
Right.
I need this map for this book.
I'm just kind of curious whether that's going to be like a growing industry, right? As more of us are doing this kind of stuff, is there going to be
I mean, I'm sure there's like grad students who have the skills who would look to make extra money doing
right,
that sort of thing.
right? Someone should start a company, huh? Right?
I'm going to a workshop in Ontario in May, and there's also a bigger workshop in Victoria every summer, and you can do either like 1 week or 2 weeks, but you take like one class for the entire week, and then if you want to do 2 classes, you have to go for 2 weeks. I didn't want to commit to 2 weeks in Victoria, so I committed to 4 days in Guelph. It doesn't sound as
Is it
exciting.
digital humanities
But
workshop, or-
Digital Humanities Workshop, I don't know why they're all in Canada, they seem to be. And there's different courses, I'm doing one on pedagogy, just to kind of feel them out and see what it is. But that'll be interesting to see if there is sort of a network developing of contractors.
Right. I mean, again, I'm not saying we're out to hire any, but like just as you
Yeah,
think,
no,
sort of
but
think
it's
forward
just
for
the-
like
yeah.
doing this kind of stuff.
Well,
I mean, part of it
even
is
for-
collaboration, but
right.
part of it is literally that there are just like skills of things that,
Yeah.
you know, of compiling data and things that like not even as skilled as ArcGIS, you know what I mean? But like, is that going to be part of the support network for academics at some point? Because we honestly can't do all
Well,
the
I think
labor.
right now there's, you know, that stuff sort of where money is, right?
Right.
But
Yeah.
Right. Well, that's what. That's what I'm wondering is if like
Yeah,
that's going to be.
we want to try to do like some sort of like introduction to like some of these methodologies, like for an online course. So I'm not sure how that's going to look at all.
Huh. That could be fun.
But my students are I'm introducing them to Scalar actually for an annotation project. So we're doing something like really simple, annotating a document using Scalar. This seemed like the most intuitive of the things that I looked at. But it's something that could be added on to that, you know. So like here's a project that like one class started, but it could be like added on to over time. So let me know how it goes.
yeah.
No idea how it will go.
I think that the capstone projects, though, as mentioned, like when you have students who are in computer science or library studies or something like that, there are quite a few of those groups. I think that is
Yeah.
one of the easiest
The library
ones.
seems to have, I think it is getting a lot, I know a couple of people at the library here, but most of my connections to a lot of these, especially the open sources, have been through people from the library.
libraries,
Yeah, so there's people who have the skills.
Any other questions?
Well, more than a question, a comment. So, if you go, say, up to tenure and you have a product like this, it might really be the case that it's not appreciated or whatever. But right now, if you ask for an NSF grant, they are already asking you, okay, list not only your publications, but what resources have you created for the public or things like this. So I think it's already been appreciated. And I was also thinking the idea that you could create a resource that actually creates more data, so people upload their own data. I think that's really a big trend right now. Well, I guess we would call it crowdsourcing. But so, for instance, the Smithsonian has projects like these, etc., etc. So I think definitely you can get something new.
Which department are you in?
World languages.
I'm sorry?
World languages.
World languages.
Yeah. Yeah, but so basically, I guess the big keywords there would be things like citizen science, crowdsourcing, and there's a big trend there. So definitely will be appreciated, but maybe not in terms of, okay, I have a book versus I have this.
I think you have to negotiate that with the chair.
Yeah, but definitely it's a trend that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think, you know, it also partly depends on your field and how much that, like, I don't know, 19th century Japanese history, like, I don't know how many other people care about sort of the shipping networks that I care about. You know what I mean? Like, the crowd might be pretty small. And then out of that crowd, the one person that's gonna, do you know what I mean? Like, there's other, I mean, yes, in the grand scheme of things, I think that's the idea, right? That's the hope that a lot of that will come together. But I think that there's also still obstacles.
Yep.
Yeah.
But Yvonne's right, because I've been looking at NEH grants and, I've applied for, I've been part of NEH summers and so on and so on, and they, more and more, at least from the stuff I'm looking at, they're getting away so much from, let's give scholars funds to go write a book or go talk to other scholars in that little tiny field of 5 people.
Right.
And it's so much more now, what are you going to do for the public?
Right, yeah, I mean, that is a huge shift, and I think graduate students are coming out of programs now with more of that
Yeah.
kind of mindset. I feel like maybe a lot of us graduated at the wrong time for that. But I don't know what role schools are playing, and for us, we're not, I mean, if our students want to do digital humanities or go work with earth science or something like that, they are free to do it, but we are not training them for that.
And my faculty senate, or our department's faculty senator, has come to me saying our new provost engagement is a really big word for him. And he's a pretty classically trained
Right.
person in a very conservative field.
Right.
But he's very much in tune with this.
So is he going to open up some funding to help us with that?
He's going to tell your department that you've got that online revenue you can.
Great, okay, so thank you so much, that was really, really